Those familiar reminders that NBA basketball has returned. Autumn winds, leaves changing color, a Kawhi Leonard injury hovering over the Clippers, lingering inflammation in Kawhi's surgically repaired right knee, which has withstood an ACL tear and multiple meniscus injuries, will sideline him to start the season. And Clippers fans are probably looking for someone to blame, or at least for an explanation. Those fans can be forgiven for feeling misled. At this point, if Leonard or a Clippers official tells you the six-time All-Star is feeling great or progressing well, you can rest assured that the out indefinitely press release is just around the corner. When Leonard was sent home from Team USA's July training camp, Clippers president Lawrence Frank insinuated the national team was being unfair to Leonard. By Frank's estimation, Kawhi looked very good in camp and should have been given a longer runway to prove he could be ready for the Olympics later that month. But now 3 months later, Leonard's troublesome right knee has prevented him from taking part in any contact-related preseason work, and he'll begin the regular season on the shelf. That unpredictable health only reinforces how baffling the decision was to hand the 33-year-old a 3-year extension worth nearly $150 million back in January. In a bizarre statement released following Paul George's avoidable departure, the Clippers cited Kawhi's abilities as a reason the franchise still felt confident it would field, quote-unquote, a highly competitive team this season and moving forward. That statement was written just 3 months after a right knee injury forced Leonard to miss postseason games for the 4th straight spring. It seems an unending faith in Leonard's failing body has led the Clippers down a path where the only option left is lying to themselves, all while handing the West favorite Thunder a top pick in the loaded 2025 draft. In other words, 2024 has been a good reminder of what this franchise's entire existence should have taught us all by now. You can never trust the Clippers. And with that, welcome to the Unfiltered Show. Welcome to season 79 of NBA basketball. My name is Joseph Casciaro. Our guests today are the hosts of the Hello and Welcome podcast, Will Lou, Alex Wong. What's going on, fellas?
Yo, proud to be back once again, I know our previous episode did numbers, so...
Oh, man, is that how we got welcome back?
To do even better, man. Thanks for having us, seriously.
Yeah, I love you, Cash. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Always bringing that love. Love you guys, too. Thanks for being here. I was on your show last week. I went on the Hello and Welcome pod, and we talked about our most important players who will define the 2024-2025 season. Make sure you guys all check out that episode and every episode of the Hello and Welcome podcast. Today, I guess what better way to start than with the Clippers and Kawhi, who I just ethered. Well, not so much Kawhi. It's not his fault. He's always hurt. But at some point, you got to deal with the facts. So, we'll start with you. I guess the simple question is just how boned are the Clippers? But everyone knows how boned they are. How fascinating do you find the whole Kawhi knee Clippers saga? Because as I was saying off the top, the thing that just perplexes me is the miscommunication of it all, which it seems like every time this is how it goes.
Oh, yeah. Look, this is part of the Kawhi Leonard experience. Like, you're going to get, on one hand, one of the greatest players of all time. When he's healthy, when he's available, he'll easily match up with pretty much any sort of top player when he's in that state. But there's also the other 80% where it's just like you just kind of have to manage like the PR disaster that he kind of is. Yeah. I remember even because obviously we're focused on the Raptors and we're heavily invested in the Raptors. Like that season when the Raptors won the championship with Kawhi, that whole season like it was a primer on like explaining like okay he's not going to be here and then introducing the idea of load management and it's all going to be worth it. It's always going to be worth it in the end, and that's the promise. And that was the one time it actually was. Because that season, Kawhi was actually able to play the whole postseason. He was the best player in the world that year, and that was great. And that's who the Clippers thought they were getting when they sacrificed everything to get Paul George and the combo deal to get Kawhi. And since then, they've only ever had to deal with the other stuff with Kawhi. I think there's only been one playoff series he actually finished healthy, and that was the bubble.
Yeah,
which was a very extraordinary situation.
And they blew a 3-1 series lead. So it's like, you know what? This is just kind of what you signed up for, and that's why when you re-signed up for this, that was a little crazy. But then the Clippers have no choice. What else are they going to do? Look at the rest of the roster. It's bad. Yeah. I guess the thing, though, that perplexes me and a lot of people is because I get what you're saying. They didn't have any other choice, right? Mm-hmm. They were kind of down this rabbit hole of the sunk cost fallacy of like everything they had put into this team, and there's no incentive to taking a step back because they don't control their own first-round pick till 2030. So it's like they're moving into a new arena. All we can really do is keep trying to contend. Even if we have a small chance to contend, we have to try to bank on that chance. But then after re-signing Kawhi, because they're so invested in just kind of keeping this thing moving, and after, essentially agreeing to bring back James Harden, even though they hadn't at the time put pen to paper, then they play hardball with Paul George. And I think that's the part that confuses so many people, including Clippers fans. Alex, from your vantage point, how baffling was that part of the decision? Or I don't know, maybe you understand it. Maybe you're with the idea that they should not have retained Paul George.
The saddest thing about the Clippers, aside from like Kawhi's injury, is they have the two most unreliable stars for the postseason for two different reasons, right? Like Kawhi is availability, and James Harden is just, we've seen his track record of just not producing in the playoffs, and he's in a different stage in his career. I don't understand why they would make those three moves in terms of, number one, extending Kawhi first, but then, like you mentioned, playing hardball with Paul George. And then when Paul George is going to Philadelphia, like maybe this was a time for you to maybe pivot, move in a different direction. But then they bring back James Harden. And like Will said, like we've looked at the rest of the roster, and without Kawhi, this is probably arguably like, I don't know, they could be the worst team in the league this season.
They're like,
okay.
No,
they could be
in the West. I think you can make the argument even with Kawhi, just average Kawhi health. So let's say like 55 to 60 games. I know last year I think he played 68, but I think that's a little unrealistic.
Contract year and the 65 game thing,
So let's say 60-ish games. You get 3/4 of the season from Kawhi, average Harden health, and you look at the rest of this roster in the West. I think that's like a 12th or 13th place team. You're giving the Thunder a top 10 pick.
You know what's funny? Because I think the only argument for re-signing their players is like maybe that way you can retain the asset, right? But I think it would be an interesting thought exercise to be like, you know what, OKC, for example, maybe they have enough to win it all this year. Maybe they don't. If they don't, they're probably going to be trading picks and assets to try to get more ready, win-now players. Could you even get one of your picks back if you traded them Kawhi?
I honestly don't think
I don't think OKC would even give one of their picks back that they took from L.A. To make that kind of trade. So I think that's the other side. Is like, at least you can retain the asset. That's why, look, the Clippers, you can't act like you're the richest person in the room, and Steve Ballmer is the richest owner in the league, and then haggle over like 1 or 2 years of a guy's contract. Like, you either all in with this group or you're not. And to be halfway with that with Paul George, it makes me honestly suspect that there's something deeper that went on there. I don't know if it's the happiest marriage between him and James Harden and Kawhi. It felt like one of them was kind of unwillingly sliding into the third option, and it wasn't going to be Kawhi. So, I'd have more questions to ask there. But, yeah, in general, that's not a team that's going to factor into this season.
Yeah, for me, it just seemed like they really misread the situation with George and kind of overplayed their hand. And even though all signs were pointing to Philadelphia, they failed to recognize that there was actually going to be a 4-year max out there for him. And they thought, Kawhi took 3 years. We'll give him a 3-year max. There's no way he's leaving us. Like, no one's giving him the 4th year. And even if they do, he might not leave. And I think he called their bluff. And when they had egg on their face, all they could do was re-sign Harden, try to keep whatever they had together, and put out that bogus statement, which, like, as I mentioned off the top, they cite, like, I get it. Obviously, they've already re-signed him. They have to, he's part of their marketing and everything now. But to cite Kawhi's abilities as a reason that you're confident you will still be, like, seriously competitive this year and moving forward, when you were literally coming off the 4th straight postseason when his right knee forced him to miss time, like, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's the stat I go back to is like when Kawhi was here that 1 year in Toronto, he played 24 playoff games here. With the Clippers, since he signed, he's only played 28 total.
That's insane.
And you're probably not going to, I would bet on maybe never seeing him again in the playoffs with the Clippers because, like, right now you're talking about he has this degenerative condition. I don't think he's ever going to get healthy again. Like, I don't even know. That's the other part is, like, it's really sad seeing Kawhi at, like, 33, which is still relatively young for, like, a basketball age. But all the injuries that he's accumulated, like, we're just never going to see this player again.
Yeah. I think that's why it was disappointing, and I understand that his goal was always to go to LA and it was always to go to the Clippers in 2019. But how, as a basketball fan, are you not just disappointed? I'm not even talking about as a Raptor fan, because obviously this is a sore point for Raptor fans. As a basketball fan, when you have an all-time great like that, and he's still healthy and he's in his prime and he's on a team that can manage his health, which Toronto was the only team that could really do that for him. Why did he not just re-sign for at least one more year? Who doesn't run back a championship team?
Yeah.
And I think historically, you have to look back and be a little bit disappointed at Kawhi and his decision-making team for forcing that move to LA. Like, yes, he was so good, and that could form a really good team, especially with Paul George there. And the Clippers were actually a pretty competitive team in the years before that too. But like, you had a sure thing. If he had stayed back in Toronto, there could be another championship for Kawhi. And if you look at how many players have 3 chips and 3 Finals MVPs, like, he would be in like all-time discussions.
Yeah.
You know, and we might say, well, his body failed him afterwards, whatever, but it's just disappointing.
Yeah, and I don't even hold it against the Clippers for doing what they did in 2019. Like,
whatever.
that was a justifiable bet. I know we can clown them now because they traded a future MVP caliber player.
Any team would have done that at the
Exactly.
time, I feel like.
Any team at that time trade Shea and control of up to 7 picks to pair Kawhi and Paul George in the summer of 2019. The fact that it didn't work isn't all their fault. Some of it's injury luck, some of it's their own mismanagement, whatever. But to then get to 2024, like we were saying, and to so quickly extend Kawhi because he had a half healthy season, you know, when he hadn't played more than 60 games in 7 years before that. And then to play hardball with George, but still re-sign Harden. Like, the moves just didn't make sense sequentially. And then again, when you get to the summer and Lawrence Frank is trying to insinuate Grant Hill and Team USA were unfair to Kawhi because they should have given him a longer runway. Meanwhile, how long did they want this runway to be? The Olympics were in late July. We're in late October and he's still not ready. Like, I think that's what is just so crazy about it. And I think that's what, even though, like I said at the top, it's not necessarily Kawhi's fault. It doesn't have to be anyone's fault. But the miscommunication and like the misleading messages is what I think has turned a lot of people against him in a way, because everyone's just like, dude, like, what is the story here? If you're not healthy, you're not healthy, and that's what it is. But how is it like we're always going from, oh, he's progressing well, he's feeling great, just needs a little bit of a longer runway to be ready for the Olympics, to 3 months later he actually hasn't played any contact. Like,
yeah, and I think zooming out too, like, you know, like you think about the Clippers franchise, like they're arguably coming off 2 of their best like eras of like Lob City and then Kawhi and PG, but neither of them has resulted in anything.
Yeah.
And like you go back to like Donald Sterling, you go back to like, I'm sure Cash, you remember like the Clippers of like the 90s, even the early 2000s.
I don't want to
like,
remember, but I do.
yeah, but it's like, it's so funny to me that at the time when they signed Kawhi and Paul George, like it was, what is it, like street lights over spotlights, like it was the whole Clippers, Lakers, they're going to be in the conference finals. That never happens. And somehow the Lakers come out of this era with a championship, even though they've been a mess in other seasons as well. And the Clippers are just still the Clippers across all these eras.
Yeah. Literally the only thing they have going for them is this shiny new arena, the Intuit Dome, which is so technologically advanced and all this. Everyone will be talking about, but that wears out fast. Like, if the team is crap and you have no hope to sell because you don't control your own first rounder for the next half decade, like the shine of the new stadium wears out fast.
Yeah. If Kawhi's healthy again, if he demonstrates, like even he's a little bit healthy, would you guys trade him if you were the Clippers?
Yes.
Like look to move on
if you could
from
get
that situation.
any value for him now that Paul George is gone. Because I think even healthy Kawhi and whatever's left of James Harden in this core, you're not winning a title anyway. You're not getting out of the West.
Yeah, the comparison to draw there is what happened with Brooklyn.
Exactly.
Brooklyn also went all in that summer. They got KD and Kyrie. And
somehow James Harden was part of that
and
situation.
eventually tripled
What the
down
hell?
with James Harden too.
James Harden was there, yeah. Who can forget? But then they pivoted out of those by trading those star players with time on their contracts, and now they've actually gotten to the point where they somewhat control their own destiny. At least they can tank without you know, fearing that it's going to go somewhere else. So I don't know. The Clippers are screwed though. I mean, that's just the history of their franchise, man. They're Tottenham.
It really is, and they can't seem to avoid it. All right, some happier news for the guys that signed extensions. Yesterday was the deadline for the 2021 draft class to sign extensions off their rookie scale deals. For the guys that didn't, they become 2025 restricted free agents. Teams still control their rights, but you guys know how it goes. The most interesting deal that was struck yesterday was Jaylen Green's, a very rare 2+1 deal off of his rookie scale, where it's 2 guaranteed years and a 3rd-year player option. It's going to average out to, I think, $35 million and change per year. But the other news of the day, among all the deals that were signed, was Jonathan Kuminga not reaching an extension with the Warriors, meaning he will be an RFA in the summer. So my question to you guys, Alex, we can start with you for this one, is what is the bigger story? Like, what's more newsworthy? Jaylen Green's unique extension or Kuminga's non-extension?
Yeah, I'm actually really interested in like Jaylen Green, like the extension that he signed and what he can be like in Houston. I feel like Jaylen Green reminds you a little bit of like Devin Booker at the start of his career when guys were putting up like good stats but on bad teams. And I remember watching him last year too towards the end of the season when Alperen Şengün was out. Like in March, Jaylen Green averaged 28 points and 6 rebounds. He shot 50% from the field, 40% from 3. I thought that was the best stretch that we saw him. And I'm really interested because like Houston has all these young assets right now, different guys. And like I think Houston getting him on that deal, I'm interested to see like if Jaylen Green is going to actually develop into one of those guys for Houston moving forward.
If he does, I mean, that deal's a steal. Like,
I think it's a pure
because
steal.
it's less than the max. I don't believe he will.
Here's the thing, like, I think they've already drafted a successor in Reed Shepherd. I think Amon Thompson has a good case to play a lot of minutes in the backcourt as well. I know he doesn't really shoot it well. And to me, when you take this deal, you're essentially taking the deal that's on the table from the team. This is not really a compromise when you take the deal that they offer to you. And it almost says to me that, like, Jaylen Green just wanted the money, which is not to say that, like, it's a bad thing. I'm not trying to demonize it. What I'm saying is he actually could have got more money in the future if he had taken it to restricted free agency, for example, right? What's interesting about the question you mentioned with Green and Kuminga is they're both two players that haven't shown an ability to help other teammates. They don't lift other players. And this is something that's a little bit common with young players. I think a lot of young players got to figure out, okay, I'm a star player, I was dominated in AAU, I got great highlights, like I've been able to develop my own personal game. It's also interesting they both came in from the G League Ignite as well, but which is now since folded. They don't have the ability to make other guys better. What I mean by that is, do you set guys up? Are you playing really good defense individually? And then more importantly, are you playing great help defense? They don't do any of those three things. At least with Green, what he does have, obviously, is this dominating scoring skill set. You could say he's spacing the floor, and that's helping other guys, but realistically, not really. He's like a system onto himself, right? The future for him, and I know the comparison for it was like Zach LaVine. It's not like Zach LaVine, outside of getting max contracts, it's not like he's super valuable player. Even now, Chicago has had it's like one of those cars you drive on the side of the road that says they've written into the windshield hey, listen, for sale.
That's
call
my
this
car,
number.
man.
That's 5,000 or whatever. They have not been able to sell that car. And I think with Jaylen Green, I think that's the situation Houston wanted to get out of. Houston look at the situation now where it's we have a tradable asset, player under control. And it seems like they want to go star hunting. And quite frankly, I don't actually see his long-term future there. The only thing Jaylen Green got out of this deal was that he gets some guaranteed money for the next 2 years.
Yeah, and then he can, I guess, hit unrestricted free agency earlier than the other guys in his class. But to me, that might create a bit of friction because, if you're Jaylen Green, your eyes are now on trying to secure that next deal, right? You didn't get quite the top dollar that other guys in your draft class got. You just got decent money, but you're going to hit free agency earlier, and you're going to want to secure that next contract. And, if we can recognize it, I'm sure he and his representation can recognize that he might not be long for Houston.
Yeah.
And so there might be a bit of friction there in terms of what Jaylen Green is playing for and what the Houston Rockets are playing for as this young team who is thinking they're ready to take the next step. They're ready to start trying to win. Jaylen Green, other than that stretch Alex talked about last March when Şengün was out, Jaylen Green has never really shown in his career, other than 1 month, that he can contribute to winning basketball. He'll put up numbers, has never done it efficiently, again, other than 1 month. For all the scoring skill set we talk about and we know is there, it's never resulted in efficient scoring and winning basketball. And so I just don't know if the fit is there. Şengün is the guy they're building around, I think, and rightfully so right now.
Yep.
You mentioned Reed Shepherd. They've got Thompson. Even Jabari Smith Jr., who I think is taking some steps. I'm not saying he's going to be a franchise guy, but
Cam Whitmore, I think he's looked really good too.
They've got their own young core now that doesn't need Jaylen Green to be a part of it. And so I'm interested to see the kind of friction that might play out there. With respect to Kuminga, the only reason I don't think it is as big a story is because, he's just an RFA and the team still controls his rights. The one thing I thought was interesting about it, though, I was reading Anthony Slater from The Athletic did a report on it, and he was saying, so the Warriors offered Jonathan Kuminga, reportedly, $30 million per year. And Jonathan Kuminga turned it down because he thinks he can get max money, after this year, if he plays well, if the shooting gets better, if he's the second leading scorer on a good Warriors team. How realistic do you think max money for Jonathan Kuminga is? Because I don't think it. I like Kuminga, and I still think $30 million per year already would have probably been an overpay based on what he is right now.
I think there's some potential here with Golden State because outside of Steph, who is a second option for them, and I think that, I think Kuminga is certainly the second most talented individual scorer on that team. Obviously by some distance, they have Steph, but still, they still need him. the interesting thing with him is just like I don't always get the sense that him and Steve Kerr are on the same page. You know, and this is kind of the similar thing with Moses Moody, although Moody ended up taking the money regardless too. It's always like, look, when you're dealing with players who are, you know, off these rookie scale contracts, you have the team holding their control. Like teams usually get a better deal because they sort of hold more of the leverage here. But I think, like, yeah, I mean, the bigger question is, can him and Kerr get on the same page? We know the way Steve Kerr likes to play basketball. His basketball sensibilities are this team-oriented, let's pass it, let's cut it, let's move, play without the ball, spacing, you know, like all of that. I don't think that that's what Kuminga is. I feel like Kuminga's a very talented player, but he's on the wrong team. So whether he gets that deal from Golden State or from elsewhere, we will see. It's not like there's that much cap room out there next summer as well. So I actually do think that eventually they will, you know, end up kind of getting together and sort of re-signing, but it probably won't be the max deal that Kuminga wants.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to the Kuminga thing with Steve Kerr is that he was so frustrated with Steve last year that he got a haircut and went blonde halfway through the season.
Okay.
And, this is one of your theories, though, that anytime an athlete, a non-natural blonde athlete goes blonde, I remember you did it with Jose Barrios.
It's a cry for help. Yeah.
As you said, it's a cry for help.
Nobody ever dyes their hair blonde when they're in a good situation.
And when Barrios did it, he ended up having his worst season as a starter. So ever
Exactly.
since then, I actually subscribed to this Alex Wong theory.
This is crazy.
And but also on a serious note,
We
at that
talking
time,
hoops?
he also the report was that he wanted to trade, if you remember, because
He was actually really frustrated and then got that
Yeah.
new haircut. And I think Steve started giving him more minutes.
well, Steve
and
saw the
things
haircut, and he's
took
like,
a
"Oh
turn.
damn, he went blonde. We gotta make sure he's all right."
Sleepy Steve.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked Clippers, we've talked Warriors, and we've talked Rockets. So we've talked three teams that are going to finish between 7th and 13th in the West. Let's talk about some teams who matter more in the championship picture this year. Let's go around the room here, the panel of three, and get your championship picks, your finals picks for this season. Alex?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a matchup between the champions the last two seasons, Boston in the East, and I have Denver coming out of the West. And yeah, I think the Celtics are going to repeat. I try to find every reason to pick not the Celtics because like we haven't seen a repeat champion since the Warriors, but yeah, it's going to be the Celtics, man. That team is just too good.
Yeah, they're loaded. And Joe Mazzulla's already on his, already
Oh,
spitting.
man.
Well, did you see his latest quote? None of
Yeah.
you are going to be at my funeral. I'm not inviting any of you to my funeral, so what you say doesn't matter. He also had the
I don't
other
think
quote.
the dead person gets the right to invite people to the funeral.
Also-
Who's setting out the RSVPs
yeah,
in that?
you out the picture. Like,
Also, his other banger yesterday was talking about pressure. We don't feel pressure like as defending champions because we'll all be dead soon anyway. None of this matters. This guy is can be very creepy, but his sound bites are better than anybody else's in the NBA right now.
I'm coming around on Joe, on Weirdo Joe.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting just to see the Nuggets as coming out the West because it does feel like the Nuggets are a little bit on the way down. They keep losing pieces.
Sure.
At the same time, they do have the best player in the world in Nikola Jokic, so that's always a good pick. For me, I'm actually going to go with the rematch of last year's finals, and I'm going to get the same result as well. I think the Celtics will beat the Mavs. I don't think the Mavs have done enough to get over the Celtics, but I do like their additions. I think people are a little bit too down on the Clay thing right now, man. Like I think especially in bigger games, until he clearly shows me over a 7-game series, like we're still talking about an all-time player. I think the only thing they needed from Clay is like to get to that Ray Allen level that was there for the Heat. And I think that that's still something that Clay can do. I mean, he still averaged like 18, 19 a game last year, still shot the three really well. And then, of course, I think some of the other depth additions were solid. They have some young pieces that they can improve upon. But, yeah, the Celtics, unfortunately, are impervious. Like, when you talk about winning strategies, you need 5 out spacing, and you need guys who can switch all the positions. That's sort of been the case for the last 10 years now, even though we haven't had repeat champions. But the last time we had that was a team with 5 out spacing like Golden State who can also switch all the positions.
Yeah.
And that's what the Celtics have.
Yeah, and I think you could argue, even though the roster hasn't really changed, that they are a little deeper than they entered last year with because their top 6 is still at the best top 6 in the league. And Peyton Pritchard, like to me now, is going into last year, I was like, Peyton Pritchard's like, he's solid, but I wouldn't really consider him part of a championship rotation. He's more than proved himself as like a key rotation piece, like bench piece as a part of a championship team. He looked great in the preseason. He's an elite shooter. Like to me, obviously he's not as good as those guys in the top 6, but he's part of that like best 7-man rotation in basketball. So to me, they look a little deeper than they did a year ago. We know how dominant they were last year, the last 2 years, really. I'm sticking with Boston as well, so not a lot of variety here. In terms of the Mavs and people being down on Klay too, I think what people forget is like the Mavs, because of Luka and Kyrie to an extent as well, create more corner threes than any other team in the league. And I know Klay's not like a corner specialist. He can shoot from anywhere, and most of his threes actually come above the break. But still, when you have guys that will create the space for shooters like Luka and Kyrie, you have to think there'll be like a bounce back for Klay. And to your point, doesn't even need a bounce back per se. Like he still averaged a pretty efficient 18 points. He just needs to be steadier.
Yeah.
He can't have those like 1-for-9 games. He can't.
Klay's a really like, I'm not even saying emotional in a bad way. I think he's just like, you could tell he's an emotional player sometimes because he's chasing it so often.
Yeah.
And him coming off these injuries for the last 3 years here, like I'm sure it's frustrating for him that like, you know, he used to be this great player, and like we used to talk about the Splash Brothers. Now we really only talk about Steph. You know what I mean? And like his level has dropped off. But like at a certain point, there's less pressure that you got to put on yourself because you have other great players around you who can set you up. And I actually don't even mind putting him in the corner because it's like half of Klay's bad shots are him just like randomly pulling.
I know.
You know, and so if you cut that down and you like really buy in, which I do believe in, that's a big thing that, you know, Dallas has to do. I think the upside is really big.
Yeah, I guess the other side too is like if you know what his defense looks like, because he's obviously not the defensive player he once was. His mobility isn't the same. His burst isn't the same. If he gets played off the floor defensively, that could be a story too. Like he's not going to be happy about that.
Plus, Klay's never been that kind of guy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like I know what you're talking about, right? Like, we've seen centers, for example, played off the floor defensively, or small point guards played off the floor. Like, I think Klay can do enough, man. Yeah.
Seems like a lot of questions for a guy you think is going to help a team make the finals, is all I'm saying.
They already made the finals. That's the thing. They just got to get back
I think
there.
that player has sailed, man. I think Klay is just at that stage where you're going to get those 1-for-9 games, and you're not going to be able to rely on him in like a 7-game series, like in the playoffs. I just don't think that player's there, even if you're saying you're putting him in that role. Like, we've watched Klay the last few years. We've seen him decline.
Yeah. Well, that's why the Mavs are not my West pick.
Okay.
I'm
Who's
going
your
with
pick?
OKC. I just think, look, youngest 1 seed and youngest series winner ever adds Caruso and Hartenstein, who like fit that team perfectly. Hartenstein obviously addresses their biggest need for like size and rebounding help. Caruso, arguably the best perimeter defender in the world, joining an already elite defensive team. To me, they have almost no holes. They're as close to perfect as a team in the West gets right now, with an MVP level superstar at the top in Shea, Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren, like kind of budding all-stars. To me, this is the best team in the West. They have all the ingredients they need now after taking their postseason lumps to get there. I think they win the West. I think they're the biggest threat to Boston to actually win a title this year, but I still think Boston has the edge. All right, other than championship teams, there's also some dark horses. Well, 2 of us will talk about dark horses. One of us picked another championship favorite. But you know what? Let's start with Will. I sent out some prep for this episode. I said, hey guys, one of the things we're going to do is give me a dark horse team or player to watch this season outside of the contenders. And Will, your dark horse pick was?
I don't know if people have heard about the New York Knicks. I don't think a lot of people talked about them this
third best
offseason.
championship odds.
Okay, here's my thing with the Knicks. Nobody actually thinks the Knicks is going to win the East, right? Everyone's picking Boston. All 3 of us picked Boston here. They're clearly the odds-on favorite to repeat and represent the East, obviously, in the process. But I think with the Knicks, they're the closest ones that have replicated this formula where it's so rare to have this like spacing 5 who can shoot it at volume, who can do a lot of the scoring for you, who can really like change the way teams have to guard you. And when you add Towns into this mix, like, yes, Hartenstein was a big part of what they did in last year's playoffs. You know, there's no doubt. That's why he got $30 million per year for a guy who's a role player, let's be honest. But, like, with Cat, like, all of a sudden, it's going to be so much harder for teams to load up on Brunson. Towards the end of that playoff series, like, you saw, like, 2-3 guys guarding Brunson every play. He was still scoring, which is a huge testament to him. Nobody's in the East has actually shown that they can lock down Brunson just yet in a playoff setting. And now life gets even easier with the spacing 5. Of course, this requires you to trust Cat, which none of us in this room fully trust Cat. We don't defensively. He's got giant feet. It's hard for him to really move around. And I think that, like, defensively, he needs to get to a higher level. But I also think that, look, it's Tom Thibodeau, and he's actually agreeing for the second time. First time he signed up to coach Minnesota. Second time now, he knows what he's getting into with Towns. So I'm sure he has something in mind. I mean, like, Thibodeau is a defensive genius.
Yeah.
So That's why they're a dark horse. I didn't want to go with like Indiana or whatever. Like, come on, man. We know Indiana's not winning the East, but that's why they're the dark horse.
The cat thing, though, and this goes back to the conversation we had on your show last week when we talked about the most important players for this season and guys that'll define the season. That's why we talked about Karl Anthony Towns, because for the reasons you mentioned, like the on-court fit is as perfect as it gets. Like if you just look from a basketball perspective, he very much is the finishing piece to this puzzle for the Knicks and could be the guy that gets them over the hump and ends their title drought, which will be 52 years by this spring. But the reasons to not trust him are valid. When you talk about his postseason history, the way he shrinks from the spotlight in the season's biggest moments, the defense, which, size-wise, he's more of a traditional center that Thibodeau likes, but mobility-wise, we know the issues there. There are plenty of reasons to not trust Karl Anthony Towns. And, as I said on your show, some of those things were tolerated in Minnesota, where he was a franchise mainstay and maybe the fan base isn't quite as rabid as it's not going to be tolerated at Madison Square Garden. That can go from he can go from the promised one to a very toxic situation very quickly.
Yeah, but this is where I think what helps him is if you were to drop two defenders to go up against Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, you would very likely end up with OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges as those two ideal candidates, across the board. And I think that what Minnesota showed in terms of what could work with Cat is that you have these really, really strong wing defenders around him, Ant was, Jalen McDaniel was, those guys can take a lot of the pressure off of him. The other part, of course, they had Rudy Gobert, so, whatever.
Healthy Mitchell Robinson.
Sure, I guess you teach him French, Yeah, it's tough. I think the Celtics are clearly going to win the East, but the Knicks probably gives them the toughest series, and I don't know where you guys are going. The Pacers? You want to talk about Pacers?
Who's your dark horse?
No, I mean,
dark horse in
the concept. Man. I'm not picking them to win the championship, but I have them as a dark horse to
do what then?
To finish as a top 2, top 3 team, ahead of some of these teams, the Knicks, the Bucks, the Sixers. If you told me the Pacers would be competing at the top of the East during the regular season, I honestly wouldn't be surprised.
That's what they did last year, though.
No, they were.
They ended up falling off.
They
fell off, but they were they were in the top.
No, but I would not be
seeds
surprised if the Pacers won
50
50+ games during the regular season. I think. The Knicks are cool. They're this new shiny toy from the offseason. I mean, we just talked about the Clippers and the Nets from before, how people always get hyped about these teams that get assembled in the offseason. I'm honestly not that high on the Knicks, man. I think they're going to be a good team and they're going to figure it out. But it's with Karl Anthony Towns, with injury questions. I've seen those videos of Mikal Bridges' jump shot.
Yeah, what's he doing with that jump shot?
I just think there's a lot of questions about the Knicks that people should be asking versus just looking at the team on paper and being oh, Cat's the finishing piece. Yeah. That's troublesome to me too. I'm betting on stuff like continuity. I'm betting on stuff like guys making a jump like Andrew Nembhard, Pascal being there for a full season, the way Rick Carlisle has them playing in the regular season. I got the Pacers finishing near the top of the East this season. I think they're going to make that jump.
Did they play any better defense though?
Doesn't matter. Not in those 82.
Are they going to lead?
We got 82 game teams and 16 game teams.
That's very true. And the Pacers are an 82 game team. To your point, this team is built to rack up regular season wins.
I will be fading them in the playoffs.
Okay. All right, cool.
No, I think that's fair. I think I would too. But in the regular season, look, we know Halliburton drives elite offenses. He always does. And he's got a more loaded team to start the season than he ever has before. We know what Carlisle can do, at least in the regular season, with getting an offense humming. Full season of Pascal Siakam. Miles Turner is just kind of that steady 3-and-D center that's kind of always been there. Andrew Nembhard potentially taking another step after his playoff exploits. A pretty deep team. I think this team's going to win a lot of regular season games. And to your point, Alex, I can see them finishing second in the regular season and then losing in the first
round. I'll be
round.
taking the Miami Heat the 7th seed.
Exactly.
I mean, they did make it to the conference finals, guys. And
against a Bucks team that lost, Giannis and Dame.
Yes.
Yeah. Giannis was out for the whole series, Dame.
Yeah.
And then a Knicks team that you mentioned had 4 players left. Alec Burks was their main guy in Game 7. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the only thing is they did have a lead in 3 of the fourth quarters against Boston in the conference finals.
I mean, that Game 1 that they blew that set the tone for the series.
They played well in that series.
Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of speed in which they played at, but also the number of ball handlers they always have on the floor, did give Boston problems defensively, right? It just they ran out of that, and I don't think they had a lot of composure down the stretch. But
Yeah.
I don't know. The Pacers, it's a weird team. I fundamentally, it's so hard to buy into this like paper tiger team that plays zero defense.
No, I
like
agree.
they literally is the best offense in the world, them or Boston, but their defense is so bad.
No, it's abysmal. And that's why, they're not a serious threat to win a title, but I think they'll rack up a ton of wins. All right, my dark horse is not a championship contender. They're not a dark horse to win anything, but they're a dark horse team I think people should be watching this year, and that's the San Antonio Spurs. Obviously, because of Victor Wembanyama, who himself is not a dark horse. Everyone's talking about him, but I just think the leap he's about to make from an already historic rookie season to like a true elite superstar who drives winning in the NBA. We're about to watch it unfold this year. I know you guys have already heard this stat because I mentioned it on your show, but and I also know that all-encompassing stats aren't always the be-all, end-all, but Basketball Reference has VORP, which is, similar to WAR in baseball. Victor Wembanyama was a 3.8 VORP player as a rookie. So then I thought, okay, even if he's just incrementally better, he's a 4 VORP player as a sophomore. I wanted to see how often are players that good actually on bottom 5 teams in the conference. And over the last 5 years, 36 guys have been 4 VORP players in a season. And the only time one of those guys did not at the very least make the play-in, be a top 10 team in his conference, was Luka 2 years ago when the Mavs purposely tanked the final week of the season, or else they were going to be a top 10 team. So essentially, given how good Victor should be this year, it would be unprecedented for a player that good to be on a team that's not at least top 10. And I don't see anyone having the Spurs in the play-in. So for that reason, the Spurs are my dark horse because Wemby watch is real and Wemby mania is real.
David Vorp over here. Yo, I didn't know we were on True Hoop podcast.
I'm super.
You tell me anything about Wemby, I'll buy it, bro.
Yeah.
No, honestly, like I know the Spurs, the over-unders have them at around like the mid-30s, and you're right. Like depending on the jump that this Wemby makes, and depending on like how much the Spurs as an organization want to win games this year, I can see them like accelerating the process and them getting into that conversation. Just because Wemby, the possibilities for Wemby is seriously just like endless.
Yeah.
Like I honestly would not be surprised by anything that he does this season.
Yeah. The only thing with Wemby too is like in his rookie year, I felt like he was just trying stuff, almost some stuff like he was like seeing what he can get away with in a way. And I think that when you have Chris Paul as your teammate, Chris just kind of like clarifies everything for you by yelling at you, basically. Although he gotta have some real balls if he's gonna yell at Wemby. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Yeah,
But
he's gonna yell at Wemby.
Well, he'll get on a ladder and yell at Wemby if he has to.
Yeah, 5'3" and an attitude, man. He really is that kind of guy. But like, I think for that, I think that will actually really help accelerate his development. Because Wemby still, if you watch his like shot attempts, like half of them are like bad shots. He's so talented, he's making a whole bunch of them, and he's so physically gifted that he's never going to be inefficient necessarily. But I do think that the rest of that roster is pretty unserious, but Wemby alone makes it really hard to roll out.
I think they're a little more trustworthy just in having CP there. He's not gonna, he's not gonna be healthy for 82 games, but the way he organizes an offense keeps things humming.
Yeah, hall monitor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hall monitor, the perfect way to describe him. Harrison Barnes. Listen, I'm not saying he's gonna be the reason they make a play-in tournament, but even just like a solid vet who kind of knows his role, knows what he's doing, can shoot, provide some spacing. Vassell taking another step. I think that'll be big given how out of sorts this team was last year. Like Jeremy Sohan was their point guard for half the season. Like there's going to be a big difference in terms of just like organization. And I think when you have a guy as good as Wemby, that's huge. But we'll see how it all plays out. Will, Alex, always a pleasure. Always a blast when you guys return. Like I said, you guys are the first returning guests on the show. Let the people know where they can find the Hello and Welcome podcast.
Alex, go ahead, man.
Yeah, Hello and Welcome pod. Follow us across all the social media platforms. We're Hello and Welcome podcast on YouTube as well and wherever you get your pod. So make sure you subscribe. Lots of Raptors coverage, lots of NBA coverage during the season. Going to be doing a lot of stuff around the Raptors' 30th anniversary season. Hopefully get some fun guests, former players, all of that stuff. So follow us throughout the season. And of course, Will's post-game show for all 82 Raptors games this season.
That's right.
Well, we'll have you guys back for sure at multiple times over the course of the season. I'm sure I'll see you on your show as well. I'll see you tomorrow night at the arena for the Raptors season and home opener. But until next time, for Alex Wong, for Will Liu, for the guys in the control room, my name is Joseph Casciaro. This has been the Unfiltered Show. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.